Welcome back to another episode of the Montgomery Companies podcast. I'm your host, Jordan Montgomery, and today I get to spend time with Aaron Thomas. Aaron is an author, speaker, and a high school coach and principal. Aaron's family story is truly one of the most iconic and inspirational stories of our time. It's a story of hope, faith, love, and a lot of grace. It's a story that made the front cover of Sports Illustrated and won an ESPY for the Arthur Ashe Courage Award. It's a story that Aaron continues to tell in an effort to inspire, motivate, and impact others. Aaron, I've been looking forward to this conversation for a long time. We got connected through our mutual friend, Mark Hubbard, who we both love and respect. And I just got to tell you, man, it's a real honor to have you on our show. Thanks for making the time.
No, I appreciate you, Jordan, having me on, and the folks you've done this with. It's truly my honor and privilege to be here with you today.
Well, I admire the way that you have handled yourself, carried yourself in light of tragedy and really unique circumstance. We're going to talk about that today, your family story and some of the things that you've dealt with over the last 12 to 13 years. And before we go there, I just want to give our listeners some context. And I know you're going to add some context to your family story and your background, but if you're listening and you don't know Aaron Thomas, you should know this. Aaron Thomas is a part of a legendary sports program. Aaron, you were the son of legendary high school football coach Ed Thomas, who at one point was named the National High School Coach of the Year. He did make the front cover of Sports Illustrated, won the Arthur Ashe Courage Award. We're going to talk about that. But in his heyday, when he was coaching, 37 years at Parkersburg High School, 292 wins, 2 state titles, 5 players in the NFL. From a school that maybe has 60 kids a class, something like that. Yep. Is that right?
Right. Yeah, right about what we're at.
And then on top of that leaves this huge legacy. You know, your dad had this quote, and this is what really stood out to me. He wasn't just about winning. He was about building young men, building people. He said, if all I've taught you is how to block and tackle, then I failed you as a coach. So I know that your dad was a man of character, a man of faith, and his whole life was way bigger than football. I'd love for you to take us back to Parkersburg High School, maybe back to the early days when you were growing up.
Yeah.
Just tell us, what was it like to grow up in that community? What was it like to be the son of Ed Thomas? And what did you experience as a kid?
Yeah, it was a lot of fun growing up. You didn't know any different. And in my youth, it was just Parkersburg, and Appleton was our biggest rival. The 2 communities are 4 miles apart. And so for me, hanging out with my dad would be things in the summer, going up to the weight room, had the awful chore of helping set up. He loved his field even back then. So the field's called the Sacred Acre, which he never, ever called it that. That was all his buddies who kind of dogged him. And there's stories, if you read the Sacred Acre, the book, you'll hear about guys putting fake dandelions on the field and all these things. But, some of my earliest memories with my dad were setting up back then, there was no underground water system. So we'd have to go move all these pipes, and between my brother and I, we could almost carry one of them. So we'd be up there, but as a treat, if we helped set up, we usually got to take a run up and down them a couple of times and do some of those things. But, between that and then being up in the weight room, just with my dad, with the high school guys, being the ball boy, those were the things that I think back to my childhood and things you don't realize at the time, but how special that was. And I think for me, it instilled, as I say when I speak, I never thought my dad really had a job, didn't have a career. I thought he just loved hanging out with high school kids because he was passionate about what he did. And, as a second, third grader, you don't understand passion, but you can see it. It was very evident. And I think that's why I went into education, just seeing his passion for what he did every day. And, to your point, it was about the biggest thing he enjoyed, seeing young people become the best they could be, or young people achieving things that they never, ever dreamt they were capable of. And I think my dad had that gift of kind of installing that into people, or believing in them and getting them to go above and beyond. And so for me, that, a lot of my childhood during the school year, it'd be, and my dad was also the athletic director. So, I go up with him to help set up the gym before a basketball game, and I'd be up there after, and I get to go shoot and do all those things. I'd watch the high school guys practice and just kind of a school rat, gym rat. And that was a cool thing, for me. And in return, my kids now have got to do the same, kind of had the same experience with my line of work, following my dad's footsteps. But those are the things that that I think I value very much. We didn't do family vacations. I think we went and watched the Cubs play once. My brother and I were big Cub fans. We went up to Minneapolis. We watched the game. My dad is a huge Yankees fan, so we watched the Yankees Twins play. I think we did that twice. So that was about the extent of Thomas vacations. I think our true first family vacation was I played AAU basketball. I got to play for Martin Brothers my junior year, and we went to Las Vegas. So my parents came out to Las Vegas to watch me play. But those memories and those experiences, riding the bus, being on the sidelines, the ball boy, all those things are just a huge part of, I think, why I went into education, and to see the passion my dad for, like I said, working with young people. Like I said, it was about third grade when I think I knew I wanted to teach and coach because of what he did.
Well, you're obviously having a lot of impact in the world of education and in the world of sports. And it's important to know you're a great athlete yourself, a 4-year letter winner at a Division I basketball program, Drake University. But now you've got this responsibility of kind of carrying on Dad's legacy, in addition to your responsibilities of being a principal, a coach, leading in the community. And I want to get into some of the events that really shaped part of your dad's legacy. 2009, there was an event that really changed your entire world. And that event actually changed the lives of a lot of people around you. But before that, in 2008, there was another event that a lot of people forget about. There was an F5 tornado that sort of devastated the town and actually devastated the high school and a football stadium. So can we talk about that before we go to 2009?
Yeah. So when the EF5 tornado hit Parkersburg, it was, we hadn't seen devastation like that. And at the time I was at Union High School, was the assistant principal athletic director there, had boys basketball. And I'll never forget, it was commencement Sunday for us at Union when the tornado hit in Parkersburg. Fortunately, Parkersburg Appleton Parkersburg had their commencement the week before, because had that been going on, it was obvious right before 5, so they wouldn't have been during commencement. But the devastation is something that you don't forget when you see it, but it's something you can't prepare for when you see a third of our town completely destroyed. If you come into Parkersburg now, you'll still see, you can tell exactly where the tornado went by the maturity or lack thereof trees. They're starting to grow. It's crazy. It's been 13 years since the tornado. And so you're starting to see, but the part of town that was hit looks kind of like a new development. We're a up and growing suburb, which we're not, but there was people without homes. And I will say one of the most unbelievable experiences was just watching the community rebuild, to see neighboring communities and people who used to live here that came back to help. For a town of 2,000 people, for us to have 2,000 volunteers show up for 2 straight weeks, it's things you can't explain, except that there's still very good people out there that still care about their neighbor, and take neighbor, whether it's a neighboring community, whether it's a neighboring state. But the amount of people who came to Parkersburg who didn't know anybody here, that showed up with heavy equipment, with chainsaws, with whatever needed just to help. I think, especially in our day and age today, was something that was unbelievable. All of a sudden, as neighbors, if you and I are neighbors, if your fence was just a little on my property line or that tree limb was hanging out, that stuff didn't matter anymore. And that sense of community that was established after the tornado, and just everyone pulling for each other, rebuilding common goals, was such a positive thing to see after such a negative. We had 7 people killed from Parkersburg in the tornado. I think there was 2 from the neighboring town of New Hartford. But to see a third of the homes destroyed, that is something that you're not prepared for, but to watch and see a community rally together, and honestly a state, because with the amount of volunteers that came, Parkersburg would never, ever be rebuilt without all the volunteers.
Well, at the center of that story is a football program. And your dad was one of the people who sort of led the charge in the reconstruction of the town. And then, late August, September rolls around and football came back. And everybody in the town talks about how the first football game was really a sense of normalcy, right? Mm-hmm. Things were starting to become normal again. And it's been a football town forever, right? And so for the town, the way I understand it, I've never been to a game, Aaron, but the way I understand it is, man, football is the deal, right? In your backyard. And again, your dad was, I know, a really integral part of putting the community and the school back together. And then just a year later, in June of 2009, there's an event that changes the town, certainly changes your life, changes things for your family, changes things for another family, the Becker family that we're going to talk about. And there was a ripple sent, I think, really around the country, just because of the work that your dad had done with so many people. I remember, in fact, where I was standing when I got a phone call from a mutual friend of ours, Andy Campman, and I received that news. Would you mind walking us through the event that changed your life in June 2009?
Yeah, kind of like the tornado was something you never ever plan to experience or be a part of. I can assure you, never ever thought my father would be murdered at school in front of 22 high school age kids by a former player. Just all those scenarios. It's something you don't ever prepare for. You don't ever plan on. We hadn't had a murder in Parkersburg since 1923, so never really even on a radar that something like that might happen to you. And reflecting back, I think watching after the tornado, how my mom and dad handled adversity, losing their home, losing both where my mom worked at City Hall, destroyed, dad worked at high school, completely destroyed. I think seeing that example was preparing myself, Todd, probably, I would say my brother, for June 24th. It doesn't make it any easier, different. And I also credit my mom a lot for her leadership. She hates public speaking, and Todd does too. So that's probably why I do all of it. But to watch that and go through, and then to have dad obviously murdered that morning, did send you in just a tailspin. And as you said, everything, I was at Union High School at the time, and this happens. And shortly thereafter get asked about, would you be interested coming back to Appling to Parkersburg, taking your dad's job? And there's parts of that I at first was like, there's no way. It was a smaller school. I was at Union. We just went to the state tournament in basketball for the first time. I was kind of establishing myself, building relationships with the people at Union that I watched my dad do here. And at Appling Parkersburg, there's going to be one Coach Thomas ever, and that's going to be my dad, and I was able to become my own Coach Thomas down there and kind of starting to build my own legacy. So there was all these just whirlwind of emotions, and everything was happening, honestly, so fast. But at the end of the day, the opportunity to come back home, and one of my dad's biggest sayings and slogans was never forget where you came from. And he was huge on that. And for me to have the opportunity to come back home, to, hopefully be around my mom. And when I say help her understand, my dad mowed the football field 3 times a week. My dad mowed our home yard 10 times the entire 18 years I lived there. So my mom didn't need help from that stance, but just to be around her was something that my wife and I, that mattered to us. For me, a big piece was, if I didn't come back, I couldn't complain if things that mattered to my dad didn't continue, if those legacy pieces on sports here being more than just about winning or losing, but about growing young men, young women, the culture, the pride in the community, the school. And so part of me really wanted to see those things that mattered most to my dad continue, the field being green and lush, and, all those things that I grew up that were important to me because what I saw instilled by my dad, I had the opportunity to continue that. So at the end of the day, I think that's what brought me back here. And I was fortunate Mr. Thompson was superintendent at the time, gave me the opportunity along with the school board to return. And at that time, our brand new high school was just about to open. And so my dad never actually worked in the new high school. He was very proud of it. So for me to come and open that and be a part of opening a brand new building, which was a rebuilding after the tornado, kind of rebirth. And then shortly thereafter, my dad's murder, it just, looking back and reflecting, was fortunate enough to have the opportunity. It did matter. And that date still affects me. I think as a family, we've all been able to get ourselves up and kind of move forward. And that was kind of my dad's mantra after the tornado. But with where we are now, and it wasn't just because of my mom and I and Todd, it's been a community effort. I think we've just got to be a main part of it because of the legacy of what my dad had established.
Well, I remember that afternoon, and I remember you were having to respond, to the media. So here you are dealing with the shock
Right.
of what had just happened with your dad. And then there's the questions and in the media, and it was pretty intense.
Yeah.
I remember just looking from the outside, I can't imagine being in your shoes and dealing with that. But one of the things that you said and your response to the media that really caught my attention, and I think it caught the attention of a lot of people, is that we need to pray for the Becker family. Dave and Joan Becker were the parents of Mark Becker,
Right.
who we find out later was, mentally ill, maybe even more so than what people realized. And he had two brothers, and his father all played for AP, played under your dad, and Mark
Right.
played for your dad. And I think one of the parts of your story that really stands out to people is how the Thomas family loved on and cared for the Becker family in the midst of that tragedy, like right away. And so can you talk about forgiveness, grace, like give us a window into how you responded to the Becker family and maybe that relationship that's formed over time?
Yeah, I think, my mom gets 100% credit for that message. She had no interest in going to do the press release that day. And I'll never forget the DCI had assigned us a person who was going to help us write this statement on behalf of the family. And, I always convey it to, if you watch your local news, a picture will pop up, words scroll across the screen, they all kind of sound the same. Well, I learned the reason why is the same people usually write or do those press conferences. And probably me being back to third grade, just watching my dad after that tornado, I just said, Mom, do you care? I'll go speak on behalf of the family. So I can remember my mom didn't go to the press conference. It was myself, my wife, Ellie. Todd at the time was actually trying to get home from Jamaica. He was at a college roommate's wedding when this all happened. My uncle Greg went with me as well. And just when I spoke that day, that was truly my mom's heart. I think we were so in shock at the time, or nothing had sank in, to your point. But I can remember sitting at our table, my mom just talking about the importance of our message to continue Dad's legacy. Because if all of a sudden our message is different, or finger pointing or blaming, everything my dad worked 58 years for goes out the window in a matter of seconds on how his family responded. And, when I reflect back now, it's real easy being Ed Thomas's son when you're coach of the year, national coach of the year, you win state titles, and, you get to do all those things. But what was it going to be? I think more telling was going to be, what was it like being Ed Thomas's son in the toughest moments? And that's something I credit my mom and dad with, how they raised us, how they lived their lives. My dad had talked to, I know, Dave Becker multiple times just on Mark's struggles, from the drug use to the mental stuff he was going through. That in that day, at that time, there was definitely the respect. Dave still to this day calls my dad coach. He was a captain on his first team. There was no question that the last thing they wanted was that. They lost not only their son in the end to, prison, but in essence, they lost a mentor. As when you hear, talk to Dave, my dad taught Sunday school and was just an influence on Dave, especially, I'd say, growing up. So from those standpoint, in that moment, I credit my mom for having the foresight to know, if Ed Thomas's legacy is going to continue, it's going to be, how do we respond in this toughest of moment? And so in that press conference, I think we just kind of said what was at our heart at that time.
I think there's some people listening, Aaron, that needed to hear that message today, because I think as humans, we all hold on to stuff. We're not naturally wired to forgive and provide grace. And you guys showed, I think, the Becker family, the love of Christ, really. I mean, it was grace and forgiveness. And we know that we all need grace, but that was such a profound example of grace and of love. And you helped the entire community kind of rally around their family. It wasn't just your family that rallied around them, but you helped a contingency of people really rally around them. And I understand it's still a relationship that is fairly close today. I mean, you still live in the same small town and see each other. And I mean, what's that like?
Yeah, it is a little different now, just as Scott Becker was their youngest son. He graduated. They lived north of town between Allison in Parkersburg, and Dave worked in Allison. So they don't get this direction near as much. I think when you talk to people in communities, when their kids graduate, all of a sudden they're not at every sporting event. They're not at it. And I know, they don't attend the same church anymore. I know they just commented it was so hard going into church, not seeing my dad. He was such an integral part. He taught adult Sunday school since 1979, was a deacon and an elder. And I think some of those memories were just too hard to see that for them. They're still very much people of faith, and I know they were well connected at their new church. But I think, it's crazy. Our paths don't cross near as much like they did once upon a time. And I think, though, I could say the same thing about other people that same age whose kids, now I can't even call Scott Becker's not a kid anymore. He's, grown and married and successful at what he does. So, life continues to evolve and changes. And I don't think our relationships are the amount of time we see or don't see the Beckers is any different than the same people who graduated in 2009, or when their kids are done with school. Your life kind of moves forward. So from that standpoint, we don't interact near as much as we were at that time. But when you look back, was Scott going to be a senior? It was just there as parents and just experienced my oldest just graduating, your high school schedule and all their activities, that is your social event. And when they graduate, from what I hear, I got a ways to go yet before all my kids are out. Things do change. And so from that standpoint, I think thoughts haven't really changed for them. You don't see them as often. So maybe that wound or those immediate what happened isn't there as much. And I think, our family, while we never ever forget my dad, I do believe we have moved on and moved forward, and we knew we couldn't live in June 24th forever. Or you get full of, hatred, or you'd be stuck in this dark cloud and you wouldn't become the people we're supposed to be. And so from that standpoint, life has definitely continued on, and anybody who's experienced loss, not just a tragic murder like if you lose somebody, a parent to a heart attack, a car accident, cancer, it doesn't matter. And what I've told people is my loss is no greater than the loss you've experienced. It was different. It was magnified by media because of, a school shooting or what happened. But I firmly believe the loss I felt of my dad is no different than anybody else who loses a parent. It's really not. And for people who've lost children, I can't fathom that. To me, that is a harder loss, a greater. And, if people could take something from how we responded, and if God can get the glory, because truly it was the Holy Spirit worked in our family to move us forward, because I don't think by human nature you could move forward from something like that on your own. I really, really believe, it was the Holy Spirit working within us that was enabled us to move forward, because our human nature, I don't think would have got us there.
Well, there's this old adage that you can tell a lot about a person when you watch them play hurt.
Yeah.
Whether you're actually hurt or you're emotionally hurt, relationally hurt.
Right.
and you've dealt with a lot of hurt. And now today you're helping people who are hurting. I think your story is an inspiration to a lot of people who are hurting and going through devastating loss, but also on a day-to-day basis, right? You're coaching high school kids who deal with issues and problems. And so as a coach, I'd love to hear a little bit about, what loss has taught you in terms of how you lead, how you help people through difficult problems, and maybe even some of what your dad has taught you about leading through adversity.
Well, I think the one quote I'll every time I have the opportunity to speak that I talk about, I'll never forget. It was after the tornado, and the day before we were going to bulldoze the high school. My dad somehow talked FEMA and allowed him to get this football equipment out of the back closet. And so we have an assembly line and we're getting everything loaded to move. And a reporter from the Des Moines Register shows up. And I'll never forget, my dad took time. He answered all of his questions. And my dad had this little S10 truck that he got. Dale Howard was kind enough after the tornado kind of hooked my parents up with some vehicles quick, because they had nothing. I mean, our parents were destroyed. So we get in this little S10 truck, and our elementary wasn't destroyed, just the high school. So we're going to take everything, move it to the elementary gym. And I can still vividly remember this, but Dad answers all the questions, and we're going to the elementary. The reporter leaves, and I just, why do you keep doing all these interviews? There's so much stuff to do today. Why did you take that time? And I was 30 and my dad gave me one of the, the finger point to the face of, and he said, Aaron, anyone can lead when things are going well. He said, true adversity is when your character gets revealed. And he just said, people will watch me with a microscope to see how I respond after this tornado. And he said, my life has been so easy. I've been so successful here at Appleton Parkersburg since I came here in 1975. But he knew in that moment how he responded to the tornado. Could he get himself up, be that energetic leader, cast a vision? I think that was one of my dad's best gifts. He always had the ability to cast a vision, to see things that maybe others couldn't, of where it would go. And so for me to watch that, that was the piece, for him to tell me, anybody can lead when things are going well. And it's true. That's not leadership. When you're winning, when you get to start, for young people, if they get to start, for parents, when your kids are getting A's and they get to lead in the musical, or they get to be the start, that's not hard. That's not when they probably need our parenting, except to keep them grounded maybe. But how do we lead during those toughest of times? And for me to hear that, I have no question it was preparing me after that tornado for June 24th. And that's one of the biggest things I've taken with me. And I think, how we respond through adversity says an awful lot, because anybody can win. Anybody can be successful. Everybody doesn't always handle it with grace, but way more telling about our character in those toughest times.
Well, there's no question that, adversity reveals character.
Yeah.
And I think it's revealed your character. I think it revealed your dad's character. When we think about the Thomas family, we think about the word leadership. I know leadership's been a part of your story and your journey, certainly was a part of your dad's journey. But the other word that always comes up is culture. Mm-hmm. I've just kind of, we do our research, before we do an interview, and doing my research about you, Aaron, people kept using that word culture. So Mark Hubbard and kept saying, Aaron's a guy that could just build a great culture. And has built a great culture. What have you learned about building culture through adversity, but also through a lot of winning? I mean, you've done a lot of winning in your career. Tell me what the word culture means to you.
Culture is it's the presence of who you are as an organization. And I don't care what level. You want to talk about a team, you want to talk about, for me as a high school principal, what is our high school culture, from our teaching staff to our support staff to our students. What culture, what do you want people to experience and feel when they come into and either a part of it or they experience it for the first time? And, my dad was huge long before all the great stuff in culture and leadership. Like, he was into this stuff, then it was Lou Holtz, and he'd watch all these, videos. And I don't think people, they didn't realize the need for it or how drawn to it people are. I love it. I'm sure, like you, the podcast, the books, I could lead everything John Gordon writes. There's so many great things out there. And I think my dad was almost ahead of his time in that, because he understood the importance of culture. And to me, the way he taught culture, one of the things I can want to, to his quote that you referenced earlier, the two things when I started teaching and decided to do this for a profession, he said, Aaron, number one, if these young people aren't better people after being coached or taught by you, then you failed them. That was his number one. But the number two thing that I took away, I'll never forget, he told me the other thing, Aaron, he said, some of these kids are going to need your team more than your team needs them. And he said, you've got to find a way to keep them involved, because it might be the only time they ever get to be equal with their peers. It might be the only successful thing they get to be a part of. And I'll never forget, he said, you might be the closest thing to a father figure some of these kids are ever going to have. And so that challenge of, it wasn't about winning championships. It really wasn't. And he'd always say, if you take care of the little things, the big things take care of themselves. That was his deal. And that was from running only five offensive plays. We had more than that, but everybody liked to give him a hard time. I mean, it was simple, but the attention to detail. And for me in culture is, I think the biggest thing is, do you treat others how you want to be treated? I mean, it's truly that simple. Are people valued? Because what I've found is, as a leader, I will assure you, I am not the smartest person in Appleton Parkersburg High School, but will I empower those around me or that I get to lead to become the absolute best they can be? I will assure you, I cannot go teach pre-calc. I cannot go teach chemistry. And I want my calc teacher, I want my chemistry teacher to know I 100% support them. I back them. What can I do to help? What can I do to make your classroom the absolute best it can be? What do you need from me? And then if there's areas, that we need to refine, if I see that, I think that's, how do I address that as a leader? nobody deserves to have their dignity taken away. And I think so often, if your job or your leadership is nothing more than a title that's on your doorway or some little plaque thing you put on your desk, you will never build an organization that's worth repeating or that people want to be a part of. My goal at Appleton Parkersburg, I don't want our teachers to leave because they think they work at the greatest place there is. And that was my dad. He truly thought Appleton Parkersburg was the greatest place, and it was contagious. And as a leader, if I don't show up every day thinking I don't work at the greatest high school, how can I ask my teachers to have that enthusiasm and passion? And if our teachers can't, how are we going to get 14 to 18-year-old kids to buy in that this is a special place? And to me, it ultimately starts with leadership. And I think, through reading and more so watching, because we can write and the verbiage, we can say it, but what do our actions show? I could tell you all these things about how I think I lead. But if you went and if you talk to my teachers and they said, no, that's not Aaron. He walks around like he's the most important person. He doesn't value the time I put in. He doesn't value the relationships I build with my students. It's all for naught. And then Appleton Parkersburg is going to be nothing more than a paycheck to a teacher. It's going to be nothing more than a place a student has to show up to learn, not a place they want to be, not a place where they feel valued. And so to me, honestly, that sense of culture is the number one thing that we have to do in education. I think it's the same in work. We're in a job shortage right now. You go to Subway and you'll see a sign, hey, sorry, limited hours. We can't find people to work. And my son was able to make a state tennis tournament. It was in Waterloo. It was the best sign I'd ever seen. So we go in to get subs quick between his matches. And I go into Subway and the sign's posted. And they said, we apologize in advance if we're a little slow. Please don't take it out on the people who actually showed up to work today.
Wow.
It was so well. And I talked to the manager when I got my say. I just thanked her for how hard her and her staff was working, knowing, state tennis, you got people from all over. They were doing their absolute best. And it might have been easy to be frustrated. But at the end of the day, that manager, I think, told those people who were there, hey, thank you for what you do. You matter here. Because of you, we're able to at least be open and do our best. And that's leadership. That one sign is something that was leadership. And it pointed out a problem, but two, I think she was telling her folks who were there, who did show up, I appreciate you. I value you. And as leaders, that isn't, at the end of the day, that's our job, I think. And that's the stuff that excites me. You can tell, I know I'm talking faster and getting, it so matters. And I think in our society, it matters more now than ever before.
It does. Well, I know that our listeners just got so much gold out of that segment right there, Aaron. And I can see it in you, man, the passion and the love for people and leadership in a school and your family. I know one of the things that is behind all this, right? The driving force, you might say, for your passion for leadership and family and people and culture is your faith. And that's been really well documented. If you study the story, your family story, you read the book, The Sacred Acre, you see anything on the news. I mean, your faith is just a thread throughout. And I think being in the public eye, sometimes it's hard to wear your faith on your sleeve, but you do that really well. And I'd love for you to speak just a little bit about what that means to you and how you lead through faith, while still keeping the understanding that, hey, not everybody maybe believes the same way that you do. Yep. Obviously you're an administrator. So in today's world, we got to be a little bit careful about that. But you seem to strike a really great balance of being bold about your faith and still, not, pushing it in somebody's face. So what does that mean to you, Aaron?
Yeah. And again, I was so fortunate to have an example that I got to live with every day and watch. My dad was a great man of faith and always set that as the priority. The slogan that came up after my dad's passing was faith, family, football. And it was in that order for a reason. And we gave him a hard time that family was about this much ahead of football. We were a second, third were pretty tight, but no, we just came, but there was never a question about what number one was. And I think the way he did it, it was way more in how he lived his life. It wasn't just verbiage. I think my dad had an unbelievable knack of living his faith, never beat people over the head, but when the opportunity presented itself, he was very good at taking advantage of that moment. And he wanted people to see there was something different about him, how he carried himself. And he was the same person I think one of the best ways to tell that, do people change around you or do you change around other people? And my dad's language never changed. If he was around, this certain group of guys, and my dad had some interest, like some of his friendship circles were extremely interesting, but he never changed. I never ever saw my dad drink alcohol. And I think a lot of that, he grew up the son of an alcoholic, but at 58 years, and I talked to some of his high school buddies and they said, my dad would drive him around and whatnot, but he never drank, but that was his example. He was going to live. I didn't hear my dad swear. And that were things that so impressioned me as a young person. I strive, and I'm not, I still feel I don't measure up to my dad. And ultimately, that's not the ultimate goal. I mean, it's not, I'm not doing, my faith has to be my own. And I think as a parent, that's the one thing that I've really had to learn with my own children. Now that I got one that's going to go off to college, it's got to be his faith. It can't be, mom and dad expect. Now our kids are going to church and they're going to be there because I think that discipline is important. But at the end of the day, it's got to become your own, but two, it can't just be a faith on Sunday, how I act. And now some people are going to who've watched me coach basketball and think that guy's claiming to be, because I get wound and I'm competitive as it comes. But in between the stripes, we'll compete and whatnot. But when it's done, I still, the competitive nature, I think you can still be a Christian and be competitive. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But it's, what are your antics? What are those things? And like I said, not perfect. I mean, there's times I have lost my composure and done some of those things that shouldn't, but, can you do it with humility and grace, success or failure? Can you build those relationships with other people, other coaches, and spread your impact that way? That's what I got to see my dad do and have tried to do that. And I don't do everything like my dad. When I got hired here, one of the first things I told him is I won't do everything like my dad did. Just like I actually use a computer. He hand wrote everything. So, there's things you put your own stamp, but for me to have that example was huge. And I think just the challenge of what I want my boys to see, how I want, if I don't lead by example, with my Christian walk, I can't expect my kids, you can't just dump them off at youth group or dump them off at Sunday school or church and hope somebody else takes care of it. And I grew up with two great parents who lived that. My wife comes from a strong Christian family with her dad, her mom. And so those influences were huge. And my hope is, some of those kids who maybe don't have those same influences, that same value, they can see something different in me that attracts them to it. And then as my dad did, if that opportunity presents itself with a question or this or that, that's where you take advantage. And that's where I think God opens those doors for you to use your position or to use your relationships to hopefully share his word.
Well, I want to underscore what you said. You said, do you change around people or do they change around you? Powerful quote. I want our listeners to hear that. And I think you're right. There's that old adage that, we ought to share the gospel. And if necessary, we use words, and faith is an action, right? It's how you lead through your example, and you're doing that and your dad did that. And I want to end kind of on this note with you, Aaron. And I'm going to ask you maybe a deeper question that maybe you're prepared for, but I know you talk to your dad often. I'm sure you believe that he's in his eternal home, right? Yep. And he's living some of his best days, I'm sure. Yeah. But if he was with you and maybe he stepped into your office today and you got a minute with Pops, you got a minute with your dad, Ed Thomas, what would you say to him?
I'd probably tell him how much I loved him and how appreciative I am as everything he did, for me, growing up and the example he was. Because I think you don't realize it in the moment. I'm hoping with my kids, I'm a whole lot smarter in 20 years than I am what they think I am now. And I know that was for me, but just the role model he was and just how thankful I was for my childhood, for his love, for his example, for just the support he gave me. I think especially with my challenge with my sons is, he respected me. He believed in me. Those are such important characteristic things that reflecting back now help me become, the confident person I am to do what I do today is because of the way he came alongside of me, the example he set for me. So those are the things that, just the thank you that maybe I didn't get the chance to say or that I took for granted. And reflecting back now 12 years later, that's very clear for me to see.
Well, there's somebody listening. There's at least one person listening that's going to reach out to Pops,
Yep,
maybe you're listening and it really makes you stop and think. I got emotional just listening to you share that, because I think about the relationship that I have with my dad.
Right.
And life is so short. And I think about the brevity of life, and it's here today, gone tomorrow. And as a believer, we know that we've got an eternal home, right? Mm-hmm. Our life is really not here on earth, but it's eternal, right? If we believe in Jesus. And
right.
But I want to say thank you, because I think, Aaron, your story and the way that you conduct yourself and the way that you continue to tell the story stops people dead in their tracks. It really makes people think and pause about, what is life really about? What am I living for?
Right.
And what are the things that I'm worried about? Or what am I giving too much attention to? So I just want to say thanks for sharing this time with our listeners. Thanks for spending time with us. And I guess my final question is, if you had any other just thoughts, comments, or advice that you wanted to share with our community, whether it's about some of the stuff we've already talked about or anything else unrelated, what would you share?
I think one of the things, my dad often talked about, you never know when you're going to have a platform. You never know when you're going to have an opportunity. And I don't care what your role is, taking pride in our work and what you do, the way you can impact whoever you come in contact with. Don't take that for granted. Oh, I'm just whatever, you fill in the blank. If you don't think your career is, of some high standing, you can still be such an impactful person to everybody who comes around you. I think my dad proved that at a small school, his impact that did get heard, throughout our country, but it was how he lived his life each and every day with the passion and the enthusiasm for what he did. Each and every one of us can do that. And if we do that, how much better of a place would it be? If we don't just think of ourselves, we take great pride and we work as hard as we can. And we live to serve and impact other people. You're going to have a heck of an impact. My dad left a legacy, not because he left a bunch of money, I'll promise you, because he left a bunch of relationships and he stood for something. And each and every one of us have that ability.
Amen to that. That's for sure. Well, I know we're going to have some people that want to reach out to you, Aaron, that want to know more about you specifically and your work. Today, you're a speaker and you're speaking a lot. And you're getting a lot of inquiries and people want to hear more of you. So if somebody wants to hear you speak or they just want to get in touch with you, Aaron, where do they find you?
Yeah, the website, Aaron W. Thomas Speaking, is out there, and that's the best way to contact me. It's through one of my best friends from high school, Brett Kramer's kind of the guy who organizes all those things for me. And or they can email me at Appleton Parkersburg. Just jump onto the school website, shoot me an email at my school email. And I have been very fortunate to be able to go out and tell my dad's story, and which has led to talking about things that I'm passionate about with the leadership, and done all those things, and just feel so fortunate to continue my dad's legacy, to tell my story, and then hopefully inspire and help others that go through tough things, that you can be better because of it. And you can keep moving forward, even in the worst possible circumstance and situation. But truly just my honor, Jordan. I so appreciate you having me on and giving me this platform and chance to speak with you today. And like I said, love the leadership. I know the lineup you've put together, and to be able to have a segment, think I'm worthy of that, is I'm blown away and humbled by the opportunity. So I do thank you for the chance today.
Well, this will be one of our best episodes ever. And we did cover faith, family, football, just like your dad would want it to go. Right. And this is just the beginning of a friendship. And I know we're going to do some cool stuff in the future, Aaron. So I just want to say thanks again for hanging with us. Thanks for your message. Thanks for who you are. Thanks for living out what it means to show the love of Christ, to give people grace, hope, and you're an example for a lot of good people, and you're an example for me. You're an example for our listeners today. So thanks again for being with us.
Well, my pleasure. Thank you.
This has been another episode of the Montgomery Companies podcast. I'm your host, Jordan Montgomery. And again, we want to say thanks to Aaron Thomas for his wisdom, his message, and ultimately the life that he's living that's leading a lot of people forward in a positive direction. We also want to say thank you to the late, great Ed Thomas. Thanks for your example. Thanks that we get to have these conversations about a life that you lived that was meaningful and significant. Thanks to our producers, John Choate and James Roth, all the work that you do behind the scenes to make these episodes go. If you enjoyed today's conversation, I'd love it if you'd like, share, or subscribe to this podcast so we can move our mission of impacting more people forward. Be well, be great. Have an amazing day.